My name is Flavio. I'm from a Brazilian company called FSB Comunicações. We are a leading company in Brazil. We have been founded 33 years ago, and we have offices in Rio, São Paulo, Brasília, Belo Horizonte. We have around 200 clients in Brazil, and I have the pleasure to have with me here a colleague, a journalist, a very important journalist in Brazil, a business journalist, Cristiane Correa. Cristiane led Exame magazine in Brazil for many years. And she recently decided to stop being a journalist and becoming a writer. And she published a very important book in Brazil, a bestseller called Sonho Grande, Big Dream, about three of the most important businessmen in Brazil, the ones that recently acquired some very important business here in the US, like Budweiser, Burger King, and Heinz. So they're today very important business leadership in Brazil. So our idea is to talk a little bit about a phenomenon that happened in Brazil this year. The demonstrations you probably saw on the news, even not being in Brazil, they got a lot of attention from the media. To start with, I would like to, of course, remember that technology is changing the way people behave and the way people interact in the world. A very graphic example of this statement is... okay. Well, we're going to have to wait a little because of technical problems. But I'll show you in a couple of minutes a very, for me, strong picture that shows how technology is, in a certain way, changing the way people interact and do things. No? I'm going to show you the difference between how people reacted at the announcement of Pope Benedict in 2005 and the way they reacted in the announcement of Pope Francis in this year. No? So it's completely different, and technology is... Okay? Let's see if we can. Okay. So this is the announcement of Pope Benedict in 2005, and this is how people reacted to the announcement of Pope Francis this year. So technology started to be a kind of a very important part of our lives. And this is a true statement for the whole world, but I think it's a much stronger statement if we take into consideration emerging countries, such as Brazil. Brazil has some very important numbers when we take a look at connectivity. According to some data from Brazil, we have over 90 million people connected to the internet. And it's said that Brazilians spend more than 27 hours a month in the internet. Of course, you all know Brazilians tend to be very sociable, no? And in a certain way, we transfer this sociability to the social networks. So Brazil is the third country in Facebook, just behind the US and India, with over 76 million of active members of Facebook. And what's the number that strikes me the most is the fact that 47 million of them access Facebook every day. It says also that Brazilians tend to have 3 times more friends in Facebook than the average user of Facebook. So social networks become a very important part of the Brazilian culture. And our experience dealing with that, with social networks in Brazil, showed that some kinds of work tend to be very successful. If we consider governments, for instance, the promotion of services is something that attracts a lot of attention in the social networks in Brazil. Also, and I think this is universal, solidarity is something that receives a lot of attention among Brazilian internet users. Niche works. This is an example of work we do for a network of gas stations. They created a specific club for motorcycles. And of course, causes tend to have a lot of attention and mobilization in the social networks. And this connectivity, the way people are interacting in the social networks now, are changing the way they behave and stimulating them to share images. This is an image that happened in the last Rock in Rio festival in Brazil, when the crowd helped this person in a wheelchair to be able to see the Iron Maiden show. No? And this became kind of an enormous hit in Brazil, this photo, because of the example given. And this ability to share, this new ability to share information, to share behavior, to share actions for call, created a very sudden and unexpected movement in Brazil in June this year. Suddenly, the streets of major cities in Brazil were crowded by thousands of protesters protesting against initially a very prosaic reason. They were protesting because of a 10 cents raise in bus fares in some major cities in Brazil. The first reason, the first things that mobilized them was a 10-cent raise in bus fares. Even for Brazilian standards, a very low increase. The interesting of this phenomenon was that it was mostly and almost exclusively organized through the social networks. These numbers from Ibope, Ibope is the main research and polling company in Brazil, shows that 7-8% of protesters used social networks to decide about going or not to the marches. And 75% of them used Facebook to call their friends to come to the marches as well. We have to consider most of them were students from the middle class, from the Brazilian middle class, so a very connected crowd. This movement didn't pass through the traditional channels of the society, parties, organized institutions, organizations, the traditional media. It was mainly and almost exclusively organized through the social networks. And it created a very strong symbol that is the hashtag Vem para a Rua. It means come to the streets. That is very similar in a certain way what happened with Occupy Wall Street here. That was first a movement on the internet that became a popular movement. You know? A first change in this movement was that after being focused on a bus fare raise, it also started to have different demands. Demands that were very broad, very unspecific, difficult to understand. The protest became a protest against the situation of health, the poor situation of education, the inefficiency of the government, the corruption in the government, with no concrete demands, just these broad themes that were mentioned by protesters. And a second important change happened when the protest became violent. We started to have black blocs, as you have here in the US as well, anarchist movements infiltrated in the demonstrations, trying to create a sensation of chaos, of violence, and targeting a lot of brands, specifically banks and international companies, such as McDonald's, as you can see in the photo. It's written there, Happy Mac Garbage, what is written over there in the door of the McDonald's. So it became a very important challenge for brands, a very important challenge for those big events that Brazil will host in the next few months. We're going to have the World Cup in June in Brazil, and we're going to have the Olympics in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro. And the protest focused a lot on corruption in the investments made by the Brazilian government to build stadiums and build infrastructure. And against also the international organizations such as FIFA, because they are considered not transparent and very arrogant by the Brazilian population. And of course, it had a very strong impact on the image of politicians. If you take the blue line, this is the approval ratings of President Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. In the exact moment of the demonstrations, it dropped by less than a half of what she had. And it was not just only the president. If we take, for example, the mayor of São Paulo, You see the blue line is the rate of approval, the red line is disapproval. A very steep change for them as well. And the governor of Rio de Janeiro, that was doing a very good job, but was also a very important target of demonstrators with a very strong impact on in their approval ratings. And with an international impact in Brazilian image. Brazil was seen as a poster boy for a country that was fighting inequality, was improving, growing its middle class, attracting a lot of investments. It was the cover of The Economist in 2009 as a big promise, Brazil taking off. And in September this year, because of the demonstrations and because of other reasons, of course, Brazil became a kind of a doubt among the international community, because people start thinking, what's going on there? No? How can we praise Brazil a lot and at the same time the population is on the streets protesting? No? So an important impact in the Brazilian image. And another challenge for everybody, especially for the governments, how to establish a dialogue when you have a movement that has no clear demands and has a fragmented leadership, very fragmented leadership. So just to conclude and to start our talk with Cristiane, some conclusions that we got in the last few months is that social networks became a key channel of social mobilization for protests, for the society as a whole. It's not only a phenomenon in Brazil, it's a phenomenon that happened in the Arab Spring, it's a phenomenon that happened in Turkey, in Egypt. It's a phenomenon that is substituting, in most of the times, antagonizing traditional media, traditional channels of communication. Rede Globo, as you can read in the sign, is the main TV network in Brazil. They have newspapers, magazines, and is the main national TV network. Rede Globo was one of the main targets of the protests. Okay. It's something that will have, as I said in the beginning, a very important role in developing countries, in which the media is not so developed as in developed countries, in which the population is very much connected, in which the population is still very young. So among youngsters, these kind of trends will be very strong. It's clearly happening in a mirror effect. The protests in one country is affecting the way people protest in other countries. The Brazilian protests were very much influenced by the Arab Spring, for instance. And it clearly points for a new model of demand from the society in relation to brands, public service, and big events. You see, this is an HSBC being vandalized by one of the protesters in Brazil. Those institutions, governments, companies, international organizations will have to adopt a new standard of behavior and relationship. This is something FIFA cannot just arrive in one country saying the way things should be done to have on a World Cup, for instance, without listening to society, without being transparent, without showing their accounts, their numbers. I think that Brazilian was the last World Cup that things like that will happen. And of course, it's forcing institutions to reinterpret the concepts of ethics, transparency, and credibility. Companies will have, because of these movements in countries such as Brazil, Chile, Spain, the whole Middle East, no, not the whole Middle East, but in a lot of parts of the Arab world, in Europe, here in the US, we'll have to try to understand a little better how things are, how these movements are, being born, and how they're, in a certain way, creating new demands for these organizations. Just to end my presentation and start talking to Cristiane, I would like to show a very short video. It's a TV commercial that my company produced for the bus systems in Rio. You remember that the initial demand of the protest was against the raise in the bus fare. The bus system got very scared with that because a lot of buses were burned down by the protesters, and they were, let's say, a very specific target of the protest. So they hired us to try to come up not only with an advertising campaign, that's the case I'm showing now, but to start, helping them establish a new standard of relationship with the society, a new standard of transparency. And we are starting this commercial. We started last week in Brazil, trying to address the subject and try to show to society that the bus system is willing to change the way they behave in the past.
Somos 40 mil profissionais, brasileiros, cariocas de coração. Garantimos a realização de 90 milhões de viagens por mês. Nossa frota está entre as melhores do país, nos índices de emissão de CO2. O BRT da Transoeste tem 93% de aprovação. Desde que as manifestações começaram, você sabe, nada disso importa. Nossos usuários estão insatisfeitos. Isso importa. O problema não se resume ao aumento ou à redução da passagem. A experiência de andar de ônibus precisa ser melhor. Para que mais cariocas escolham ir de ônibus, iniciamos um movimento. Movimento Ônibus OK. O programa de melhorias que mobiliza todas as empresas do setor. Para você solicitar e acompanhar mudanças. E o Rio terá mobilidade passo a passo melhor. Todas as informações já estão no site. Cada ação realizada será indicada por esse selo. Pode contar, pode cobrar. Rio Ônibus. Tudo para ser melhor.
This at least to my knowledge, the first campaign in Brazil that made reference to the demonstrations and to the protests and tried to address in a certain way this subject. Cristiane, what do you think was the main reason for this sudden movement of protests in Brazil?
Well, first of all, it took everybody by surprise. Nobody saw that coming, right? Which is kind of weird. No journalists, no parties, nobody saw that coming. And I think that Brazilians simply had enough. After so many years paying high taxes and having poor quality services and a very high cost of living, they were just fed up. And they went to the streets, even though they didn't know how to do that, demonstrations, and no leadership emerged. They were just fed up and said, well, we had enough, we need a change. And at the time, I talked to several businessmen, and the general feeling was that, well, nobody knows what's happening, but it might be good for the country. At least some change can come from that. Well, everybody was concerned, right? Because, nobody was aware of that. They were concerned, but they had this hope that something good could come from that. Actually, nothing came. Nothing came. There was a lot of protest and blah, 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 but after a few weeks, as sudden as it emerged, it disappeared, and it was substituted by the black blocs, which is a totally different thing. So recent polls show that Dilma Rousseff approval has risen again. So it's hard to understand really what happened because there was a lot of protests and many millions of people on the street. But then suddenly it was like a dream. They woke up and nothing else happened.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that companies, that brands in Brazil, they listened to the protests? How they reacted in the beginning, and how do you think they will react now that they're not over, but they're not as strong as they were in the beginning? How do you think companies will react to that?
Well, I think the advertising you showed, it's something totally different from the rest. I mean, I haven't seen anything like that before. What I saw from the companies was that they kept quiet. The companies that were attacked, banks and multinational, we saw that McDonald's, they didn't say a word. I don't know if they didn't know what to say, or if they were afraid that if they stand up, it would be worse, and they could be even a bigger target. But in general, they just shut up and didn't say a word. And I'm not aware that they had any kind of interaction with the groups or anything like that. So opening new channels of communication with stakeholders or anything like that, I don't think that happened.
And do you think it will happen? Do you think it will have an effect, an important effect on the way companies are behaving in Brazil?
Well, certainly. Well, they're afraid now. So they know something can come up again. Let's take, for instance, what's happening with the Olympic Games. You mentioned that FIFA was, they go to Brazil as a colonizer, and they bring the whole package, and, this is the way we do things, do as we say. And the committee that is organizing the Olympics is trying a different approach. What they're trying to do is that they have some initiatives to engage with the people. So if you go to their website, for instance, you have many links to Facebook actions, Twitter actions. They're trying to interact with people and not just say, well, we are so good, we know what we're doing, just do as we say. Recently, they launched a blog where the employees tell everybody how's the work, the daily work of building an event as big as this one. And I know that in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, I'm not sure, they're gonna begin a open door policy. I mean, if you wanna know how the office works, the committee office works, you enroll in a program, and every week 20 to 30 people will go there and visit the place and get information and all that. And of course, they promised to make public all the numbers, costs, expenses, investments, everything. So they realized people want transparency. And of course, the sponsors are worried, because imagine yourself investing millions of dollars in a sports event, and suddenly, wow, there's a protest and your brand is ruined. So they are all worried, and I think some actions we'll be able to see some actions in the near future.
And how do you analyze the role of the press, in the traditional press, let's say, in all this movement? Now, for me, in the beginning, it seemed that we were lost. No, they didn't know what was going on. In the beginning, they were even pro-repression of the movements, and later they became a kind of hostages of the movement. They were even afraid to criticize what was going on, even the violence. How do you see the role of the media in this process?
Well, the media is lost until nowadays regarding this subject. I mean, you are pretty right when you say that nobody knew how to deal with the situation. And it was kind of funny because every day it was a different approach. So first, the media didn't like the protest, and then they were like, wow, protesters are so good. And then the black blocs came, and they didn't know, is this too much violence or not? And then the police repressed the violence, and then the media was against the police. So they had so many different approaches. I mean, they really didn't know how to deal with the situation, and they couldn't identify the leaders, which is a problem. I mean, you can put a face, really. So it was really difficult for them to cover the situation, and I believe the media really didn't help as much to understand the phenomena.
Why do you think they became a specific target of the protests?
Who, you mean?
The media.
Oh, the media. Because, well, people say media is not reliable. I mean, we are used to hear that about politicians, but not about the media. So media is not reliable. They say that media have many financial, economic interests and things like that, and that you cannot believe what the media writes or shows on television. So they have even a movement to, I mean, some people with just a phone or something like that would tape what was going on the streets and put it on the web. And many people found it more reliable than watching the news on television, because it was more accurate or something.
Yeah, it was an interesting phenomenon during these protests, was the surge of kind of activist media in Brazil. People called themselves the ninja medias. They would go to the protests with a camera, and they will, show them in the internet, cover the protests live in the internet, in stream, to try to show that the traditional media was not portraying correctly the reality, you know?
Yeah, it was, of course, poor quality transmission and very boring, because it was like 7 hours of the same subject on the web, but it didn't matter. It seemed more real for the people who were watching it, more real than the edited thing that they are used to see on television.
You mentioned the fact that the approval ratings of the president is already rising, you know, and she's probably leading the polls for the election next year. We also have elections next year, right after the World Cup, and President Dilma is candidate to re-election. Do you think they heard, they listened to what was saying? Do you think those protests will have any kind of impact in the way politicians behave in Brazil?
That's a hard one. I don't know. I mean, I was really surprised by the fact that her approval rates are coming up again. What I think is like, well, people were not satisfied. What happened? Why are they trying to vote for her again? So there's some mixed feelings about this. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the future regarding politics. I mean, I know that companies are listening to the complaints and are trying to do something, but in terms of politics, I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think not. I think that they have a very short-term reaction that is typical from politicians in Brazil. They, whenever something important happens, the Congress starts to debate a new project to pass a new law, but things then go to the same track.
Yeah, the
again,
normal course of things.
Yeah. But at least in some questions related to ethics, I think the society is becoming more organized in Brazil and more critical about politicians and don't accept some old standards of behavior that used to be very common in Brazil. Little by little, we're going on a track in which politicians will have to behave differently. I'm not sure if it's something that will happen in the short term in the next elections, but this is a trend. No? The media, the social networks are becoming together a very powerful tool for the society to organize itself and to demand from politicians a different kind of behavior. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm too naive and I'm too...
An optimist.
Yeah, too optimistic. You wrote a book, a very interesting book, about three very important Brazilian businessmen that are in a very important position, even if you consider them globally, you know, as entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit about it. Who are these persons and what is exactly their story?
Well, these entrepreneurs are named Jorge Paulo Lemann, Marcel Teles, and Beto Sicupira. And they are, basically they reshaped capitalism in Brazil. They have a corporate culture. They created a corporate culture that is totally different from what we see in most of the companies, based in meritocracy, cost reduction, and search for the best talents. And the great thing is that this culture is now everywhere in the world. They acquired Anheuser-Busch, Burger King, and Heinz. So, you know, 3 American icons. And so they are spreading their culture all over the world. And the funny thing is that nobody really knows them. If Jorge Paulo Lemann came to this room, probably nobody would recognize him because they are so discreet. And we are used in Brazil to have, you know, entrepreneurs who are, you know, very show-off. And they are very discreet. And I think that one of their main goals recently is to try to get some of this aspects of this culture and help the public sector to begin to work with meritocracy and cost reduction and stuff like that. Because they think that, you know, every little thing that you do in a big country like Brazil, in terms of public management, has a huge impact. It's a lot more impact than in a company. So they're trying to help the government to adopt some of these things. Well, they are not the only ones. There are some other entrepreneurs that are helping them. And I don't know, it would be great if the government really learned some of these lessons to be more efficient and to be more transparent. And I think maybe they wouldn't have so many demonstrations if they had incorporated those aspects.
Compared to other Brazilian businessmen, they're a kind of a different animal, I would say. No? Because, first of all, they have a very strong culture, their own culture. Secondly, they were very bold in their international movements. And thirdly, they have this side of trying really to help. Not only with, you know, giving money away, but trying to come up with good solutions to sponsor good students, to help governments increase or improve their practices and everything. Do you think they are becoming a kind of role model there? Do you see a new generation of Brazilian businessmen trying to simulate them or trying to have them as an
Oh,
example?
yeah, especially now that they are very rich. I mean, Jorge Paulo Lemann is the richest man in Brazil and is in the top 30 in the world. So now that he's rich, everybody thinks it's a good culture. But it's hard work because they work a lot and they demand hard work from the employees. So it's not a culture that it's for everyone because it's very aggressive and very competitive. So if you are not resilient, you just don't take it because it's really aggressive. But nowadays, I believe that this model, that's important to tell. They did all this empire without the help of the government money, which is so common in Brazil to have those big companies that have investments from the government. They don't have that. So yeah, they became a model more and more because of this, growing with their own effort and despite the government sometimes, and globalizing. I mean, there's no other story in Brazil about globalizing so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we have 8 minutes left. Let's open for questions.
Hello. Obviously, there's two big events taking place soon in Brazil, the World Cup and the Olympics. I'm curious if you're aware to what extent brands who are sponsors of these events are taking precautions now to be prepared for repeat social unrest, as we saw earlier this year in Brazil. In the event that some of these events don't take place, these companies are investing a lot of money to be sponsors, just to have a presence there. Are you aware of what precautions they're taking now to be prepared for any possible unrest, either during the World Cup or the Olympics?
Yeah, well, I know they're investing. They're trying to anticipate what probably will be going on there. They have been done their homework in terms of preparing spokespersons and having a crisis management implemented if there's the case of something major going on. I'm not sure something major will go on there. The movement now lost a lot of the strength because of the violence that became kind of very limited to certain groups, now certain extremist groups. But yes, there is a kind of crisis management mode in terms of sponsors thinking how they should react if something like that goes on during the events. I think the major concern is now the World Cup that is very close. It's less than it's around 6 months from now. But also for the Olympics. There's certainly this concern and a certain preparation for brands, at least in Brazil. I'm not sure about the headquarters now because most of these sponsors are global companies, but in Brazil, for sure, they are preparing themselves to react if it's necessary to some kind of event that might happen there.
Hi, Flavio. It was a very interesting presentation for me both.
Thank you.
I will put another kind of question. When we talk about Brazilian companies, you can be talking about huge companies like Petrobras, Rio Tinto, like FSB, one of the
Not yet.
Well, it is the 22nd, I would say, company in the world. Why don't the Brazilian countries go out of the Brazil? Is that because Brazil is so huge country? Mm-hmm. And do you think the reputation of the country in somehow affects this movement or the lack of the movement of the internationalization of the companies? Because as I understand, you have Rio Tinto internationalizing to Mozambique and some other countries, but you don't have a lot of internationalization of the Brazilian companies, and they are huge.
Well, I'll give my vision, then I'll pass the word to you. I think there are some factors. First of all, Brazil was a very closed economy until very recently, until the mid-'80s. Very controlled by the government. Prices controls, high inflation, a very complicated scenario for companies that had to focus a lot on what was going on in Brazil. Secondly, Brazil is a huge market, so it has room for growth for most of the companies. A third point I'll mention is probably the language barrier. The fact that we speak a specific language that is limited to some countries, in a certain way, reduces our, let's say, international will or your international. We don't see it as an easy task. But what I can say that is this is changing. There are some Brazilian companies that are starting to be very international companies. Some of them in sectors that the general public will never hear. Heavy construction companies, for instance. Brazilian heavy construction companies dominate the market in several Latin American countries. In Peru, they're in Venezuela, they are in Argentina, they are in Chile, they are in Ecuador. In many countries, these Brazilian companies are already multinationals. The South American, African, mostly, in which they have, I think, a competitive advantage because of the knowledge of the region. The language in Africa is an asset. They're in Portugal as well. But you're right if you consider consumer brands. Very few Brazilian consumer brands can be considered international brands. And I think it has a lot to do with this history of being in a very closed country, a big economy in which companies have a lot of work to do in their own markets. Havaianas it's today probably the major exception. Havaianas, more than a case of internationalization, I think it should be a case study for any kind of business school in the world, because Havaianas, now it's a global brand, very well regarded, very desired. When I was a kid, Havaianas was a kind of flip-flop that only the poorest people in Brazil will use.
The people who could not afford a shoe.
Yeah. And suddenly they made a kind of transformation of the product and making it desirable and trendy, and it's not only in Brazil. You go to the beach in Brazil, you're going to see everyone using Havaianas, and it's a kind of trend in the world now. But I think you're right, Brazilian companies tend to be too shy. Havaianas is one of the few exceptions of consumer Brazilian brands that are outside Brazil. Brazilian companies tend to do better in other sectors, in more heavy sectors, like
and
infrastructure, commodities like Vale and BR Foods and companies in sectors in Brazil in which Brazil are very strong. But I don't know. What do you think?
No, I basically agree with you, and I'd just like to add that the recent growth in Brazilian economy was basically motivated by internal consumers. So the government stimulated that. So the companies were really looking to
inwards,
to the own country, not outside. So maybe now that the consumption has, I don't know, it's not so good anymore, maybe they look abroad, because there's not much room to grow nowadays inside Brazil.
Yeah, the fact is Brazil was a very unequal society, and it incorporated millions of people. I'm telling you, millions.
40 million, yeah.
40 million people to the consumer market in the last 20 years. So there was a lot of room for growth inside Brazil for companies. They had a huge amount of new consumers that are starting for the first time in their lives to be able, even to consume basic stuff like yogurt. Now, the first big movement when Brazil started to curb inflation and control inflation and start to grow was people start to consume much more yogurt than they used to consume before. And it's the same thing for TVs, refrigerators, cars. So the Brazilian brands, I think, they had a lot of work inside, no? But you're right, they are too shy. And I think that there will be a new trend of Brazilian companies becoming more global. Because otherwise they will be bought and they'll be out of market.
Or will be stuck, right? Because
Yeah.
there's nowhere to... I mean, do you know Natura, for instance? So this is one example of a company that is trying to go abroad, and they have this real strong brand, and they could go abroad. They're trying that, but it's really slow.
It's a cosmetics
Yeah.
brand, Brazilian brand, no? Very strong in Brazil. And it's, okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank
we,
you.
We really appreciate you bringing a little international flavor to the conference. It's been great having you here.
And congratulations, the event was great.
Thank you very much. So, thank you to everybody in the audience. Thanks, guys.